Hello. Before Mad Max entered the Thunderdome, before Games Workshop's dark future became history, and even before Sir Ian Livingstone fired up the engines on Battlecars, there was an earlier game of vehicular madness. Created by Steve Jackson Games in the US, Car Wars would be one of the most popular pocketbox games ever made, an innovative format that stemmed from the microgame, an entire tabletop experience sold in a bag not much larger than this one. Like its older brother OGRE, Car Wars would become a legend, helping to establish the fledgling SJ Games as an innovator in design and value. And even now, you can find it on store shelves, after 6 editions and 45 years. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm exploring the micro-history of Car Wars. The American game designer Steve Jackson, not the UK one who helped to found Games Workshop, but the American one who helped to found Steve Jackson Games. He has had an enormous impact on the entire tabletop hobby over a 50-year career, not least because he created GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, an RPG set of rules that you can use with any campaign in any setting. And though that has been a mighty and long-lived achievement, it is far from Steve Jackson's only one. Car Wars is a classic of tabletop gaming auto-dueling. Highly armed and armoured cars indulge in deadly arena combat as one of the most popular sports in a futuristic dystopian America. Players build their cars from available parts and equip them with their weapons and their armour, all so that they can take to the road arena and shoot, crash, and race their way to victory. This game started life as a descendant of the microgames that had been created in the 70s and 80s, so I thought it would make sense to do a micro-history, just a brief exploration of how it all began. But before we get into those details and delve into our glove compartment looking for the Car Wars registration, why don't you take a micro moment to like and subscribe. In the years before he founded his own games publisher, Steve Jackson worked for Howard Thompson at a company called Metagaming Concepts. Thompson had created a space combat game called Stellar Conquest, which he had offered to publishers Avalon Hill in the early 70s. But for some reason, they rejected the game, and unperturbed, Thompson decided to start his own company and publish it to rave reviews himself. The game was a critical success, and Thompson wanted to publish more games, but he wanted to do it in a way that was cost effective for both the company and for the players. That's why he innovated something called the microgame. Microgames were sold as a complete game experience, one that came in a small polythene bag. They would include rules, tokens, maps, literally everything that you needed to play in as concise a package as possible.
That was all the idea of the owner of Metagaming, Howard Thompson.
Right.
His concept was for a game to have the same footprint as a paperback book, so they would be sold in paperback book racks in bookstores. As far as I know, that never worked even once, but the format was successful in game stores to gamers.
The first microgame released by Metagaming Concepts was OGRE, a game of mammoth tank combat that was designed by recent hire Steve Jackson. And then there would be many more microgames produced over the years. And Metagaming even went on to copyright the term microgame. But that did not stop other companies, like Task Force Games, from releasing their own equivalents. They did a series called Pocket Games, which included a Star Trek space simulator that I've previously briefly covered in another video, Starfleet Battles. After some creative differences, Steve Jackson decided to leave Metagaming and found his own games publishing company, Steve Jackson, or SJ Games. And he had a clear design philosophy from the very beginning.
Well, I've always been very, very quality-centered in the places where I understand quality, which leads to pretty good writing and pretty good game design, and I'm not an artist, nor am I an art director.
Right.
Very few of my games have ever been picked off the shelf and held up as wonderful examples of graphic design. I would always start with the concept.
Right.
What is this game about? What is it simulating for very loose values of simulation? What are people pretending to do when they're playing the game?
The concept behind Car Wars could easily, and some may say cynically, be compared to Mad Max, but Steve Jackson has actually compared it more often to a movie called Death Race 2000, a movie that features a murderous cross-country road race that was released in 1975 and featured an early appearance from Sylvester Stallone. And of course, there was an Expendable remake many years later featuring Jason Statham. That movie was not the only influence though, and Steve Jackson has also cited a short story written by Alan Dean Foster, the man who was responsible for the novelizations of the Alien movies, as well as some sequels to Blade Runner. He wrote a short story called Why Johnny Can't Speed, which features some very dangerous driving in an alternate American dystopia. And it also ends with a phrase that would become common to the Car Wars universe: be safe, drive offensively. The first edition of Car Wars perfectly channeled that same energy. It was initially released in that same polythene bag format of the Metagaming Concepts microgame, but it would quickly be reissued in a new pocket box format that Steve Jackson Games would adopt for all of their small-scale releases. The game was designed by Steve Jackson and another designer called Chad Irby, about whom I've not been able to find out an awful lot, unfortunately. It seems like post-Car Wars and some of its expansions, he left the industry entirely. In a review around the time of the game's release, it was described as being decently presented, fairly detailed, and quite complex. As with other microgames, players had to cut out their tokens and then they would use them to represent their cars on the gridded map. Movement was broken down into simultaneous actions split across 10 phases, where players who were driving faster could move multiple times. But of course, higher speeds make maneuvers more dangerous. And then there was the shooting, which utilised a hit table that could be modified by the weapon you were firing, the shape and size of your target, and your relative speeds, amongst other things. Right of way goes to the biggest gun. Gameplay was fast and frenetic once you understood it, and it won many fans. In fact, it even won the 1981 Charles S. Roberts Award for Best Science Fiction Board Game. Sir Ian Livingstone was a big enough fan of Car Wars that he essentially wanted his own version of it, which is allegedly the reason he developed the first edition of Games Workshop's Battlecars in 1983. And then that game would actually go on to inspire the creation many years later of Dark Future, an even more Mad Maxian miniatures game which actually shares some similar movement mechanics to the original Car Wars. Car Wars became phenomenally popular, spawning many expansions and reboots, sequels, spin-offs, video games, an auto-dueling magazine and fan club, and lots of other releases over the years. There was even an RPG. That popularity has waxed and waned over time, but there's often been enough resurgent interest to warrant remakes and new editions over the years. Just a few years ago, in 2021, the 6th edition of Car Wars was released, and it features full miniature and track sets to go along with all of the updated rules. Both Car Wars and Steve Jackson Games have a long and storied history that I've barely begun to articulate in this video, but unfortunately, the micro-history has run out of fuel, and I've got to leave it there. I hope that you have enjoyed this brief diversion into a completely different territory. I would love to continue exploring just any old random game that I really enjoy or that takes my interest, but I would love to know from you if you want me to do more of this kind of thing. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. I'm a big fan of road-based vehicular combat, but one thing that I think is very fun is plane-based vehicular combat, and there's a game that I absolutely love and miss from the olden days, called Crimson Skies. I wonder what happened to that.